So I said in the announcements that we do have a financial meeting in 2 weeks, and which we do every year. And in this particular meeting, I invite you to come and share in the conversation, the discussion there, because our council is suggesting, is moving that we move into a capital fund campaign for some of the needs that we have around here. Our steeple, our parking lot, a facelift in the parish house, a memorial garden, those kinds of things. And we have a title for this that is called Beneath, Between, and Beyond. And so works on a couple different levels, you know. Beneath is, beneath the steeple, we have to find out whether or not the inner wall of the steeple is actually connected to the foundation beneath the rest of the place. And of course, beneath the parking lot, which needs repair, we have to make sure that there is a solid foundation there, which also involves us going beneath the lawn out here to make sure that the drainage is good. So there's the beneath. And then, of course, there's also the beneath of what lay beneath all of the work that we do here at South Church. What is our foundation? And then there's the between. We have a memorial garden that we're proposing between the two buildings here, and creating some community space out there with different sidewalks. There's that between, but there's also the between of our community, between us, between each other, how it is that we support each other and share the love of God with one another. And then there is beyond, and that is beyond the end of Parish Hall. We're looking for a playground for our youngsters who are beyond us in a sense generationally. They represent the future that will be beyond us there, and the work of God's love in that time, and not only ours as well. So you'll hear more about that. There's a little thumbnail of our conversation to come. But today's sermon and the next couple weeks, you'll be hearing about beneath, between, and beyond. And today is beneath. So I had to say that to get you to one of the vectors going through today's service is, what are the assumptions that are beneath the work that we do here at South Church? Writer Elizabeth Lindsay, the first female National Geographic Fellow, says that we live in a society bloated with data, yet starved for wisdom. We're connected 24/7, yet anxiety, fear, depression, and loneliness is at an all-time high. We must course correct. She critiques our society from the wisdom traditions of indigenous peoples, standing on the assumptions of the guidance of the Spirit and the gratitude in the face of all creation. Our gratitude in the face of all creation. We know we're an anxious and a lonely people because we sense that if we are vulnerable and helpless, we will not be cared for in a significant way unless we have the money to pay for it. And if you doubt that we are anxious and lonely, I would ask you simply to look at the numbers of people in America who are addicted to alcohol or drugs or work. The first two, the number is 25.3 million, approximately 1 in 10. Many of them wealthy and successful people. Our anxiety-generating assumption is that we ourselves are, by ourselves, the basic unit of agency and meaning in life. We assume, our society assumes, that we are the basic unit for meaning and agency in life. Philosopher C.B. Macpherson says that the roots of this unrest are in the assumptions of modern life, and those are individualism, autonomy, and secularization. I quote, "Personhood is no longer embedded in an affirmative tradition, religious, indigenous, or otherwise, but depends upon aggressive, individual, self-securing through getting and consuming. In our society, getting and having are the goals of human existence, which evokes the values of satiation and self-assertiveness that show up in every area of life, including economics and sexuality." The byline is this, that we, according to our society, we can only fulfill our purpose in life if we take charge of our own lives and train ourselves to fit into the economic system in such a way that we can acquire enough to secure our place, even if that means ignoring those who are insecure. Now, while these assumptions, and they all grow out of the Enlightenment of the 17th century, these assumptions have led to much good in our society. We have to recognize that even those who are successful in our society feel insecure. We must, as she says, course correct. And you wouldn't find it difficult coming from my mouth to say that the course correction comes from the biblical vision for humankind. At least that is what I believe. And that is that we can fulfill our collective and individual purpose if we trust God's Spirit and wisdom, if we understand that our self is created between us and the other, and if we live the biblical vision in our very lives. We can fulfill our collective purpose if we trust God's Spirit and wisdom. Just before this story that Heather read for us today is the story of Jesus facing temptations in the wilderness. And in that story, he looks at his own demons, but stays true to his deeper self by keeping God's wisdom at the center. And we know that because he quotes from Psalms, which is a great depository of wisdom literature. It says, worship God, serve God, and don't put God to the test. Those are Jesus' 3 responses to his temptations. Then the Spirit that drove Jesus into the wilderness sends him off, and he ends up in Nazareth, in the synagogue. It's his hometown. And he picks up the Bible and reads this passage from Isaiah that Heather read today. And it says, the Spirit of God is poured out upon me. I am anointed by God. And then he gives the list of what he's anointed to do. Well, I would just say that this is kind of odd language for us. I mean, we don't generally go around saying, well, God's Spirit was poured out upon me today, so therefore I'm going to do this, that. We say things like, I got accepted into one of the Ivy League schools, and it's in an area that's really developing well, and therefore I'm going to study, whatever that particular area is, because I will be able to make a lot of money and be secure in that area. I mean, that's kind of how we couch authority in our lives. We don't generally say, the Spirit of God is poured out upon me. I don't know. Some days, I really believe it, and other days I'm like, oh, what the heck are we talking about? What do you mean there's a a presence in the world in some way. You know, it's a little bit too woo-woo for me some days. But if you don't feel that kind of thing works for you, then I would like you to consider this, that there is a biblical vision for what humanity is to be. And that if you don't feel that the Spirit of God is poured out upon you, that to consider the wisdom of that vision and to follow and trust that biblical vision. To trust God's Spirit and vision is not to believe that we are independent and autonomous, but that ourselves are actually created between us. Our self isn't contained here in our body. I'm here to just disavow you of that idea. It's not the case. Our self is created between us, and we all know that it's true. You know, when you're a little kid and you're starting to cry a little bit, and the question is, when you're crying, you know, is some big looming adult going to come and take you to the nursery or give you a new diaper or feed you some food because you're hungry? Or is there not going to be one of those big looming beings showing up and doing that? And if there isn't, the self that comes into being is entirely different. You see, the self isn't contained in us. It's created between us. Biblically speaking, Adam and Eve give us the same lesson. Here's Adam. Life's fine. He's in paradise. Woohoo! But he's lonely. And so you know the whole process. Eve gets created eventually, and now here they are. They are each other's helpmate. But see, they're not just helping each other, you know, take out the garbage and doing the dishes and cleaning up the house and making a living. They are helping each other become the person they were created to be. You see, it happens between us. Individualism is not the case. We are not individuals in that sense. We come into ourselves in relationship with others. The rest of the Bible plants the same idea in a variety of ways. God says to Abraham that his tribe, his descendants shall be a blessing to all nations, not just to his tribe, but to all nations. And it says that we ought to love our neighbor as ourself. And Jesus carries that even a little further and says to love your enemy. Why? Why are we to do those things? Well, we say because we want the world to be a peaceful place. Well, that's true. That's a good thing. But the other reason is this, that you don't become yourself unless you know the other. Adam looks at Eve and goes, woo! But she's different from me. I don't think he had Venus and Mars in his language at that point. But he becomes himself by coming into relationship with her. This is a diametrically opposed idea to what our society says. And this idea enables us to live with less anxiety because the other person is not to be feared as much as to be embraced. Because in knowing them, I come to shape myself, and vice versa. We need each other in that sense. The biblical wisdom is that we are not individuals, but that our self is created between the us and the other, between us and God. When I was in college, down the hall from me lived a guy named Reuben Moore. He was about 6'2" or 3. That was back, in the days when he was a black guy, and the afro was really big. He had a really big afro, and he was a gruff kind of a fellow. And he kind of prided himself as being kind of a revolutionary. And I always wondered what he kept under his bed. And I would avoid him at all costs. I thought he hated me. Well, I thought he hated all white people. And in my last year of college, I got a job working at the Chicago Parental School. And I didn't know it when I took the job, but Reuben worked there too. And one night in the lunchroom, I pulled out my brown bag, and who walks in but Reuben Moore? He gets a Coke out of the Coke machine, comes over to the table, sets the Coke down, takes his coat off, sits down across from me. I'm just eating my food. I'm just eating my food. That's all I'm doing. He says, Moon. I said, what? Hi. He says, look, I want to talk to you. Okay. You got married, right? Yeah, Sally and I got married. Yeah, it's a couple months ago. Well, I'm getting married in June, and I need some help. My wife wants to buy a set of these dinner plates that I just think are ridiculous. I said, really? Yeah. He said, look at this. And he draws a picture of a kind of a octagonal plate. And it had all these kind of angled lines on it that looked like they were kind of Egyptian writing. He said, I feel like I'm going to be eating all my food off the pyramids. This is ridiculous. What do I do? How do I convince her? We laughed a little bit. I actually don't remember what I said. Probably something like, good luck, buddy. But I learned something that day. Myself grew. It became larger than it was before, because somebody that I had feared, I discovered, was more like me than unlike me. And then my fears can keep me from becoming a larger person, a fuller person, perhaps fulfilling the call that I've been given in life. The wisdom of God is not the wisdom of our society. We are not individuals. Our self is created between us in a relationship with the other. So, Dawn was talking about being anointed, and I was going to ask, how many of you were anointed today when you got up? And it's just not kind of words that we use very much, The Spirit poured out on us. I'm always feeling a little like, oh, God, I don't know if I want to use that language or not. But I've got to ask you this, have there ever been a time in your life when something is going on outside of you and your heart starts to beat a little more and your palms get a little sweaty and you know that, you should probably step in and do something. This situation, whatever it is, it calls for a response. And you feel like, yes, I should do that. And then it's gone. And the moment has passed and you didn't do it. And then you kind of take a deep breath and you go, oh, well, it's probably a good idea that I didn't do it because, well, I don't know, I could have gotten in trouble, or maybe they would have thought I was kind of interrupting their business. I should just leave them alone, that's the individualism of our culture. I should just leave them alone. Or maybe you thought it would be too costly. It might have involved money or danger to myself in some way. And what's what's that worth? I have this belief, it's odd. And the belief is that the Spirit anoints those who will step into the anointing. And I'm going to say that all of you, all of us, have been anointed at some time for something, to step in. But, if you don't do it, if Denny doesn't respond, and he steps back and says, okay, wait, that's too much, then the Spirit goes, he didn't do that. Well, I need him to do things like that. And if he's not doing it, well, I don't know. We'll see the next time I'll get around to it. Maybe I'll anoint him again. But you got to wait. The Spirit needs us to do stuff. So maybe if you haven't experienced being anointed, maybe it's because the time that you did, you just kind of let it slide by, and now the Spirit isn't going to come around and visit you for a while. I know, it sounds wacko, doesn't it? But I'll bet you felt it. I'll bet there have been times like that in your life. Well, if we are going to fulfill our purpose, what we need to do is step into our anointing. You know how I like stories. This is from Kent Nurburn. He had a lot of jobs. One of them was a taxi driver. I was responding to a call from a small brick fourplex in a quiet part of town. I assumed I was being sent to pick up some partiers or someone who had just had a fight with a lover or someone who was going off to an early shift at some factory in the industrial part of town. And when I arrived at the address, the building was dark except for a single light in a ground room window. Under these circumstances, many drivers would just honk once or twice, wait a short minute, and then drive away. Too many bad possibilities awaited a driver who went up to a darkened building at 2:30 in the morning. But I had seen too many people trapped in a life of poverty who depended on the cab as their only means of transportation. Unless a situation had a real whiff of danger, I always went to the door to try to find the passenger. It might, I reasoned, be someone who needed my assistance. Would I not want a driver to do the same if my mother or father had called for a cab? So I walked to the door and knocked. "Just a minute," answered a frail and elderly voice. I could hear the sound of something being dragged across the floor. After a long pause, the door opened. A small woman, somewhere in her 80s, stood before me. She was wearing a print dress and a pillbox hat with a veil pinned on it, like you might see in a costume shop or a Goodwill store or in a 1940s movie. By her side was a small nylon suitcase. The apartment looked as if no one had lived in it for years. All the furniture was covered with sheets. There were no clocks on the walls, no knickknacks or utensils on the counters. In the corner was a cardboard box filled with photos and glassware. "Would you carry my bag out to the car?" she said. "I'd like a few moments alone. But then if you would come back and help me, I'm not very strong." I took the suitcase to the cab and then returned to assist the woman. She took my arm and we walked slowly toward the curb. She kept thanking me for my kindness. "It's nothing," I told her. "I just try to treat my passengers the way I would want my mother treated." "Oh, you're such a good boy," she said. When we got into the cab, she gave me an address and then asked, "Could you drive me through downtown?" "It's not the shortest way," I answered. "Oh, I don't mind," she said. "I'm in no hurry. I'm on my way to a hospice." I looked in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were glistening. "I don't have any family left," she continued, "and the doctor said I should go there. He says I don't have very long." I quietly reached over and shut off the meter. "What route would you like me to go?" I asked. For the next 2 hours, we drove through the city. She showed me the building where she had once worked as an elevator operator. We drove through the neighborhood where she and her husband had lived when they had first been married. She made me pull up in front of a furniture warehouse that had once been a ballroom where she had gone dancing as a girl. Sometimes she would have me slow down in front of a particular building or a corner and would sit staring out into the darkness, saying nothing. As the first hint of sun was creasing the horizon, she suddenly said, "I'm tired. Let's go now." We drove in silence to the address she had given me. It was a low building, like a small convalescent home, with a tar driveway that passed under a portico. 2 orderlies came out to the cab as soon as we pulled up. Without waiting for me, they opened the door and began assisting the woman. They were solicitous, intent, watching her every move. They must have been expecting her. Perhaps she had phoned them right before we left. I opened the trunk and took the small suitcase up to the door. The woman was already seated in a wheelchair. "How much do I owe you?" she asked, reaching into her purse. "Nothing," I said. "Well, you have to make a living," she answered. "There are other passengers," I responded. Almost without thinking, I bent over and gave her a hug. She held on to me tightly. "You gave an old woman a few hours of joy," she said. "Thank you." There was nothing more to say. I squeezed her hand once and then walked into the dim morning light. Behind me, I could hear the door shut. It was the sound of the closing of a life. I did not pick up any more passengers that shift. I drove aimlessly, lost in thought. For the remainder of the day, I could hardly talk. What if that woman had gotten a driver who had been angry or abusive or impatient to end his shift? What if I had refused to take the run or had honked once and then driven away? What if I had been in a foul mood and had refused to engage the woman in conversation? How many other moments like that had I missed or failed to grasp? I don't know how it goes for you, this whole God thing. I don't go through my days because I'm a minister thinking, God, 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 Jesus, Jesus, Spirit, God, Jesus, Spirit. Now, I do the same thing you do, you know. I'm wondering about the things I have to do and my family and my work, and all of that, same stuff. And then these moments come. And you feel like the Spirit is being poured out on you and your heart beats. And you wonder, I wonder, how many of those moments I have passed up when the Spirit is calling me to open to another who is unlike me so I might become more the person I was created to be. Calling me to trust God's vision for the world. Not believing that I'm an individual, but trusting, intending, in fact, to preach good news to the poor, to give sight to the blind, to set free the captive. Not simply because I am helping them, but because I, in those moments, am becoming the person that God is calling me to be. That is what is beneath us here at South Church. That is the foundation upon which we rest.